I know this is a little hard to see. This is just this is a lot of what we've already looked through. It's just a timeline of the various events. I'm trying to see if there's something else that we need everything's there pretty much. 1967, Thurgood Marshall appointed to the court. That's not what we've had. Assassination of MLK, 68. Assassination of Malcolm X in 65. He's killed by a rival Islamic group, the Nation of Islam.
What's like the beginning thing on there?
The beginning thing? Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah. All right. So we're going to keep going. Pretty much everything that's there that we've already covered. We got that. Okay. A couple other things to note. Again, some of this might be a review of the review already. This is still during Johnson's presidency. I'm noting the difference between MLK and Malcolm X. We just talked about that. Stokely Carmichael, one of the early members of SNCC, but then also after 65 starts talking about Black Power, will eventually become a member of the Black Panthers, and we'll talk a little bit about them later. We have Washington Du Bois. Oh, another person from the 20s is a guy named Marcus Garvey. He came up in the review, I think, this morning. He has an organization called UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association. He's something of a black nationalist. He encourages black-owned businesses. And, he's kicking around the time period of the Harlem Renaissance as well. Up at the top, we see out of SNCC come the Black Panthers, and then on the white side, mostly Vietnam-focused, is a radical group called the Weathermen, and they had a fascination with explosives, and they believed that the best way to overthrow, or to get rid of the war and to overthrow corrupt government is basically through terror. And so the Weathermen took their name from a lyric in a Dylan song, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." Some things are obvious, like a bomb exploding. Some famous Black Panthers: Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Stokely Carmichael. The Black Panthers get their start out in California, I believe Oakland, and they're tired of police brutality. And what they decide to do is to basically arm themselves, patrol their own communities. They're communists, so they believe in those ideals. They start a number of neighborhood programs, most famously Meals for Children, because they believe, somebody that's hungry can't learn. And so they also monitor the police as they operate within their communities. And they're not afraid to mix it up. They're not afraid to use the threat of violence. They carry weapons. And they're very concerned that the civil rights movement has gone so far, but then has kind of stalled, and larger endemic problems are not being changed. The Black Panthers totally were a focus of attention of, a certain inhabitant of the FBI building in Washington. What's his name? J. Edgar Hoover. And so he had he was obsessed with this group. If he was obsessed with Martin Luther King Jr., which he was, these people were clearly a danger. And so he had agents infiltrate them. He was using a program called COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, to infiltrate and to gather information on the group. Other things that got the group in trouble and kind of maybe caused people to fear them more is that there are some implications that they're involved in drug trade and extortion. So, they were doing some of the typical things that we associate with gangs of an earlier era, kind of walking around the business district and saying, "It's a nice shop you have here, be ashamed if something happened to it," sort of thing. That's a protection racket. And so the the Panthers were involved in that sort of thing. Money raising, fundraising activities. Well, that takes us to the fateful year 1968. A lot of crazy things are going on. Now, to set this up, 1968, Johnson is president, and what announcement has he made? He is not running. He could have run because he had served out Kennedy's term, and then he decides, and he gets reelected in his own right. He could have gone for what may have looked like a third term, but now he is totally toxic. Why? Vietnam War. Yeah. And people are marching in the streets. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? One of the famous chants. So he's out. So on the Democratic side, we have three contenders during the primary season. We've got Robert Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy. Now he's often confused with Joseph McCarthy and MacArthur. So there's lots of confusing names. And then Hubert Humphrey, who was the kind of handpicked successor to LBJ. He's kind of in, well, he was the vice president. So RFK and Eugene McCarthy are considered doves. What does that mean? Peace. Yes, so what does that mean? Stop the war. Stop what war? The Vietnam War. We need to get out. Yeah, so they're the peace candidates. Hubert Humphrey is the hawk candidate. He is going to continue the war because he believes that it would be terrible if the United States left Vietnam War without a clear victory. It would just be something you couldn't imagine. And it's something that's going to haunt Lyndon Johnson's administration. It does. How to get out of this thing, but do it in a way that looks like success. Nixon is going to have that problem. And guess who else has that problem? How do we get out of this war in a way that looks like success? George W. Bush and Barack Obama in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going back into Afghanistan now. So it's not ending. So that's the background there. On the Republican side, we've got Nixon running. When have we seen him run before? 60 against Kennedy. He then gets elected to the vice presidency. Well, before that, under Eisenhower, right? He doesn't run in 64. The Republican candidate is AuH2O, Goldwater, right? And so now he's back. And then there is a third party, George Wallace. You know George Wallace. Segregation today. Segregation forever. Right? The governor from Alabama.
I hear that he goes back and tries to reconcile with us.
So he is running as an American independent. In 1948, we had a similar split where conservative Southern Democrats couldn't stomach the new civil rightsy Democrats, and so they split off. A group called the Dixiecrats, and they were led by a guy named Strom Thurmond. So that, if you can remember that name, great. All right. Well, what happens? 1968. Well, there's tons of things going on. It's the worst year ever for the Vietnam War. There was something called the Tet Offensive that revealed that, man, we are losing this thing. It looks like they say we're winning, but it doesn't look like we're making any headway because all of a sudden, all over the South, the Viet Cong rise up, and fighting is even in the embassy grounds of the American embassy in Saigon. And so the student protest movement kicks up again. We have the assassination of King in April. In June of '68, Robert Kennedy is assassinated after winning the California primary. And what's unique about the California primary? It is, well, it's at the end of the primary season. It's one of the last, if not the last. I think it's last this year, right? I think it is. It looks like Kennedy is going to be the nominee. Well, now he's assassinated, and things are thrown into turmoil. So now we're left with McCarthy or Humphrey. In the Democratic Convention right here in Chicago, the whole world's eyes are focused. Who are the Democrats going to choose? Are they going to choose the peace candidate or the war candidate? Outside, police are doing battle with the hippies. And it's basically considered a police riot where they're going after these people with clubs. Tear gas, fights are breaking out. Yes, I mentioned it before, they're throwing flaming bags of poo. The Hilton Hotel, which is right downtown, right across from Grant Park, becomes like a triage center as people try to escape the tear gas and the batons. They can smell the tear gas and hear the crowds in the convention hall. The mayor of Chicago, Daley the father, not the one that, the more recent one, is yelling obscenities at his fellow Democrats across the hall who are criticizing him, basically saying that Daley sent out the police as his kind of armed goons to try to get order out in the streets. And so within the convention itself, there's fighting. And outside, of course, there's fighting. Well, the proponents for McCarthy fail. Hubert Humphrey gets the nomination. And it effectively, the Democrats are kind of going through what current Republicans now are going through. Just a lot of splits and rancor and argument and confusion. And so the Democrats are falling apart. Nixon comes in and says, hey, I know this may seem odd, but it looks like I'm the voice of reason here. And so he gets elected. Wallace, has limited appeal. One of the things that Nixon does to steal votes from Wallace is he institutes what was called the Southern Strategy. Do you remember what this was? Kind of dog whistle attempts by Nixon to say what to the South? He's not going to push for civil rights very hard. So don't think, you don't have to worry. Maybe like if Kennedy got elected, you don't have to worry about that. So, in addition to what's going on in the politics, there are in 68 and 67 there are fresh outbreaks of violence within the cities. So, in 67 into 68, you got riots pretty much in every major city, including even Grand Rapids, Michigan. My dad talks about trying to get home to his apartment in 1968, and he couldn't because the whole block was blocked off because there was rioting and fires being set and so on. So it was a gigantic mess. In this mix, we need to talk about some of the countercultural stuff because that's feeding into the politics as well. The countercultural movement gets its start in Berkeley. Where is that? California, the University of California at Berkeley. The free speech movement of 64 will eventually morph into the anti-war movement, but really what they're about is a decision made by the university that students could not protest on campus about off-campus things. So the students were upset that their freedom of speech was being limited. They wanted to talk about, maybe university involvement in the war through various investments or the positions of their leaders or whatever. They wanted to talk about the civil rights movement, but they're being told, those are outside issues. You can't talk. You can talk about on-campus things, but this is they don't agree with that. And so there's protests on the campus, and these spread to other campuses around. So that's where really it gets started. Then we have a group, very important group called the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. They're led by a guy named Tom Hayden. And they issue a very important document that we used to read, but we don't have any time for it. But it's called the Port Huron Statement. And basically what they're asking for is true participatory democracy. They want to restructure the way American democracy works to make it truly democratic. they're called the New Left. What was the old left? Well, the old left was, more communist and more liberal and elitist. They want, you can see there, more hippie, less commie. They want to truly revolutionize. They want to change the way people relate to each other. They want to change culture. They want to make politics more inclusive. They're calling for social revolution, a more broad-based thing, not tied into some economic theories, not just about certain liberal social programs that you might associate with like Lyndon Johnson. They say that goes so far, but we want to talk about structural racism. We want to talk about limitations in democracy. We want to talk about poverty. We want to talk about women's rights. We want to make it a bigger thing. Certainly anti-war. We want to talk about that. So they're thinking bigger, broader, more dramatic changes than some of the things that were already being talked about. Well, there are extremes on either side. We talked about the Weathermen, a famous member from Chicago, Bill Ayers. There's another group called the Yippies, and they show up in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention. And if the Weathermen were deadly serious, and SDS was kind of the new intellectual lead on the left, these students that they've got these big grand ideas, the Yippies were more Groucho Marxists. They're radicals, but they say, you know what? Let's have a good time while we're talking about some serious change. And so Abbie Hoffman and Jerry Rubin are the two founding members of the Yippies. It's short for, and the organization was the Youth International Party, and they were running for president in 1968 too. Well, actually, their candidate for president in 1968 was a pig named Pegasus. And so they were going to try to get people to vote for this pig named Pegasus. And of course, it's absurd, and that was the whole point. They were saying, hey, everything today is absurd, so why not a pig? Our country is going off the rails. And so they wanted to get you to think about change by making you laugh and doing just these weird stunts.
Historical puns that are just endless. Like, oh, he really ham it up in the office.
You could ham it up in the office. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for